There are films that transcend generations, stories that burrow so deeply into the hearts of audiences that they become part of the cultural fabric of our lives. The Sound of Music is exactly that kind of film. Released in 1965, this magnificent musical swept audiences off their feet, won 5 Academy Awards, and became one of the most beloved motion pictures ever committed to celluloid. Julie Andrews dancing across those Austrian hills, the Von Trapp children lined up in sailor outfits, the haunting beauty of Edelweiss drifting through a candlelit room. These images are burned into the collective memory of millions of people around the world. But here's the thing about beloved classics. The more closely you look at them, the more fascinating they become. Behind every perfectly framed shot, every soaring musical number, every tear-jerking moment of cinematic magic, there is a backstory that the audience never sees. There are mistakes that slipped through the editing room, facts that were quietly rewritten for dramatic effect, and real-life stories so surprising they would make your jaw drop. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on one of Hollywood's greatest treasures and take a much closer look. These photographs, these scenes, these famous moments, they tell a very different story once you know what you are actually looking at. So do not touch that remote, because once we start uncovering these bloopers, secrets, and surprising truths, you will never watch The Sound of Music the same way again. Let us begin with one of the most iconic images from the entire film. Maria is sitting on a hillside or gathered with the children, guitar in hand, singing her heart out with effortless grace and natural ability. It looks completely authentic. It looks like Julie Andrews was born with that guitar in her hands. But the reality behind that image is a lot more interesting than what appears on screen. Before filming began, Julie Andrews had absolutely no experience playing the guitar. Not a single chord. The instrument was essentially foreign to her hands. To prepare for the role, she had to start from scratch, learning the fundamentals of guitar playing specifically for the film. However, she quickly discovered that playing an instrument and singing simultaneously, especially with cameras pointed at her face and a full film crew watching her every move, was an enormous challenge. The coordination required to strum convincingly while hitting every vocal note perfectly proved to be genuinely difficult, even for someone with Andrews' extraordinary musical talent. Here is the detail that most people do not know. Before filming some of the more demanding guitar scenes, Julie Andrews would occasionally take a small sip of Austrian schnapps, a strong local spirit, to calm her nerves and settle into the performance. Now, that is not something the studio publicity team was advertising at the time. Meanwhile, Christopher Plummer, who portrayed the stern and sophisticated Captain Von Trapp, also undertook guitar and singing lessons to prepare for his character. He put in the work. He practiced diligently. And then the filmmakers used none of it. Professional musicians were brought in to re-record both the singing and guitar playing for Plummer's character, their voices and performances replacing his entirely in the final cut. So the next time you watch those scenes, remember, what you are hearing and what you think you are seeing are two very different things. Few scenes in the film generate more laughter than the moment the Von Trapp children tumble out of their rowboat into the lake, landing in an undignified heap in the water just as their father is arriving home with his refined guest. It plays perfectly as comedy. The children splash around, Maria looks flustered, and the whole sequence has a wonderful, light-hearted energy. But behind that cheerful scene lies a genuinely frightening moment that nobody on set was laughing about. Kim Carafe, the young actress who played Little Gretel, the youngest of the Von Trapp children, did not know how to swim. At all. When the boat tipped over during filming and everyone went into the water, the plan was for Julie Andrews, playing Maria, to immediately reach over and pull the little girl to safety. Simple enough in theory. But when the boat capsized, Andrews lost her footing and fell backward, unable to get to Kim in time. The child went under the water and swallowed a significant amount before being pulled out. She was genuinely frightened and physically unwell afterward, ultimately getting sick right there on set, specifically on Heather Menzies, the actress playing Louisa, one of the older children. Kim recovered and was completely fine in the end, but the incident was a sobering reminder that even in the most joyful and seemingly carefree productions, real danger can lurk behind the camera. That photograph of those laughing, splashing children carries a very different weight when you know the full story. Look at any photograph of Christopher Plummer as Captain Von Trapp, and you see a man who appears born for the role. Commanding, handsome, effortlessly authoritative, with a quiet emotional depth that makes his eventual transformation in the film genuinely moving. He looks completely at home in that world, which makes it all the more extraordinary to learn that Christopher Plummer was absolutely miserable making it. Plummer found the material far too sentimental for his taste. He was an actor who had built his career on serious, complex dramatic work, and the relentless sweetness of The Sound of Music grated on him throughout production. He reportedly gave the film various unflattering nicknames that circulated around the set, none of which we need to repeat here in polite company. To cope with his dissatisfaction, Plummer spent a considerable amount of time eating and drinking during production, and the physical evidence of that coping mechanism became impossible to ignore. He gained enough weight during filming that the costume department was forced to repeatedly alter and resize his wardrobe to accommodate the changes in his body. So while audiences saw a trim, sharp naval captain on screen, behind the scenes the costume team was quietly letting out seams and adjusting measurements. To his enormous credit, Plummer matured in his feelings about the film as decades passed. He came to understand and genuinely respect the profound effect the movie had on audiences around the world, even if the experience of making it had not been particularly pleasant for him personally. The image you see on screen of Captain Von Trapp, noble, composed, deeply feeling, was created despite the actor's reservations, not because of any great love for the project. One of the most recognizable images associated with The Sound of Music is the magnificent Von Trapp family estate, that sprawling, elegant property that communicates wealth, tradition, and European grandeur with every stone and archway. Viewers assume they are looking at a single, real, historic location. They are wrong, and the truth is genuinely fascinating. The house you see in the film is actually an illusion constructed from at least two completely separate buildings. One structure provided the exterior front shots, while a different building entirely served as the backdrop for scenes filmed from the rear. The interiors that audiences see throughout the film were not filmed in any real house at all. They were meticulously constructed sets built on studio lots in Hollywood, thousands of miles away from Austria. The beautiful gazebo where the famous song 16 Going on 17 was performed, that was purpose-built for the film. It never existed before production began. After filming wrapped, this beloved structure was actually moved not once but twice before finally finding a permanent home at Hellbrunn Palace in Salzburg, Austria, where fans make pilgrimages to this day to stand inside it and feel connected to the film. And the stunning Abbey courtyard scenes. A production designer named Boris Levin created a replica so extraordinarily faithful to the real Nürnberg Abbey, matching the precise stonework, the specific window designs, every architectural detail, that many people who have visited the real location and watched the film cannot tell the difference. Even some local tour guides in Salzburg have been caught claiming that certain scenes were filmed on location in Austria when they were actually shot entirely on a Hollywood studio lot. Every photograph you have ever seen of that iconic Von Trapp home is showing you a beautiful, expertly crafted fiction. Here is a blooper of cultural perception so complete and so thorough that it has fooled entire nations. The song Edelweiss, performed with such quiet, heartfelt patriotism in the film, feels ancient. It feels like something passed down through generations of Austrian families, something sung in mountain villages and taught to children as a matter of cultural identity. Many people around the world genuinely believe it is the national anthem of Austria, or at the very least a traditional Austrian folk song with roots stretching back centuries. It was written in New York by two Americans for a Broadway show. Rodgers and Hammerstein, the legendary songwriting partnership behind The Sound of Music, composed every song in the production, including Edelweiss, and they did so while sitting in the United States. The entire Austrian musical atmosphere that feels so authentic, so rooted in a specific place and culture, was manufactured by two men who were crafting a theatrical experience for American audiences on Broadway. Edelweiss holds the particular distinction of being the very last song that Oscar Hammerstein ever wrote before his death in 1960, just 9 months after The Sound of Music premiered on stage. The The song he wrote to sound like the heart of a nation turned out to be his farewell to the art form he had devoted his life to. The irony is beautiful and a little heartbreaking. The most convincingly Austrian piece of music in the entire film was created by an American who would not live to see it become one of the most famous songs on earth. The story of how Maria von Trapp lost the rights to her own life story is one of the most quietly devastating footnotes in Hollywood history, and the photographs of her smiling face in later years take on a bittersweet quality when you understand what happened. In 1956, a German film producer approached Maria with an offer to purchase the rights to her autobiography for $10,000. Maria, no fool, asked whether she could also receive a percentage of any profits the film generated. The producer told her that German law specifically prohibited film companies from paying royalties to individuals who were not German citizens. Maria had become an American citizen and believed she had no choice but to accept the flat fee. She signed the contract. A short time later, the same producer returned with a second offer, $9,000 in cash, payable immediately, if she would finalize the agreement on the spot. For the Von Trapp family, who had spent years rebuilding their lives after fleeing Austria with very little, this was a significant sum. She took it. The law the producer had cited did not exist. It was a complete fabrication, invented to manipulate Maria into surrendering complete control of her story for a tiny fraction of what it would eventually be worth. The Sound of Music went on to become one of the highest-grossing films in cinema history. Rodgers and Hammerstein, to their immense credit, chose to voluntarily share a small percentage of the earnings with the Von Trapp family despite having absolutely no legal obligation to do so. It was a gesture of genuine generosity, but it still represented only a sliver of what Maria and her family might have received had she retained her rights. Maria herself, in her later years, expressed no bitterness about the situation. She said the happiness and hope the film brought to people around the world meant more to her than any amount of money. That grace, that genuine contentment, tells you everything you need to know about who she really was. The film presents Maria arriving at the Von Trapp estate to serve as governess to the entire household of 7 lively, mischievous children. It is the premise from which the entire story flows. But the historical reality is considerably more specific and rather more touching. In 1926, the Nonnberg Abbey in Salzburg received a request from Captain George von Trapp for a tutor, not a governess for 7 children, but a teacher for a single child. His daughter, also named Maria, had contracted scarlet fever, the same devastating illness that had killed her mother 4 years earlier. Though the young girl survived, she was left too weak to make the long walk to school and back each day. George went to the Abbey seeking someone who could come to the house and provide her education at home. The Abbey selected a 21-year-old woman named Maria Augusta Kutra, who had trained at a teaching college in Vienna and was herself residing at the Abbey partly due to her own health difficulties. The plan was for her to tutor the girl for approximately 10 months before returning to complete her path toward becoming a nun. Of course, history had other ideas. The woman sent to teach one sick child ended up staying, marrying the father, becoming the stepmother to all 7 children, having 3 more children of her own, and inspiring one of the greatest musicals ever created. Sometimes the smallest assignments carry the largest consequences. Julie Andrews portrays Maria as gentle, slightly awkward, deeply kind, and fundamentally serene beneath her playful exterior. It is an immensely appealing characterization. But the real Maria von Trapp was a considerably more turbulent, energetic, and frankly chaotic personality than the film ever dares to suggest. Maria Augusta Kutra had a difficult childhood. Orphaned young, she was raised by a cruel and abusive uncle, and by the time she found her way to Nonnberg Abbey, she had developed into a person of enormous vitality who struggled considerably with the structured silence and strict discipline of convent life. She later described her behavior at the Abbey in remarkably candid terms, calling herself, in a 1980 interview, quite possibly the worst novice the convent had ever seen. She broke dishes. She talked during periods of required silence. She ran through the courtyard when she was supposed to be walking quietly. She whistled Gregorian chants, sacred music that is absolutely not meant to be whistled, and she reportedly climbed onto the roof of the convent on at least one occasion. This was not a shy, retiring young woman finding her confidence. This was a force of nature learning, slowly and imperfectly, to exist within structures that did not fit her personality. The gentle, softly smiling Maria you see in those famous photographs from the film represents one interpretation of a real person who was considerably more vivid, more complicated, and frankly more interesting than Hollywood was willing to put on screen. Look at the Von Trapp children in the film: Liesel, Friedrich, Louisa, Gert, Brigitta, Marta, and little Gretel, and you are looking at a set of characters who bear almost no resemblance to the real children they were supposedly based upon. The names are different. The genders of some characters were changed. The personalities were invented. And crucially, the number is wrong. The actual children from George Von Trapp's first marriage to Agathe Whitehead were named Rupert, Agathe, Maria Francisca, Werner, Hedwig, Johanna, and Martina. The oldest child was not a 16-year-old girl dreaming about love. He was Rupert, who by the time the family left Austria was a grown man in his late 20s who had already qualified as